Chapter 10. He counted 7 large, number 10, cans of food. 2 of chili, 2 of beef stew, 2 of vegetable soup, and 1 of fruit cocktail. There was also a bag of flour and another of sugar, but they had both broken open and salt water had mixed and sloshed thoroughly in them, and he assumed the contents were ruined. He started to throw the bags out, but thought better of it. Even with the salt water mixed in, there might be some food value left in the flour and sugar. That was it. No other food. And looking at the pitiful little pile on the table made it hard for David to stay cheerful. The fresh water proved to be more encouraging. He located the filler cup under the front bunk cushions when he took all the cushions out and put them topside to dry in the sun. Strangely, in all his sailing with Owen, he had never filled the tank and didn't know where the cap was. Owen always had done the water when David came to the boat. Next to the cap was a label that said the tank held 22 gallons, instead of the 20 he had thought it might be. And when he opened and checked the water, he found it to be almost full. He guessed close to 21 gallons. He pumped 2 cups and drank them immediately, and found the water to be pure, although tasting still of the glass of the boat. No seawater had gotten in the tank in the roughness of the storm. Somewhere he'd heard that normal usage of water was a gallon a day, and even at that rate he had enough for 3 weeks, 21 days. If he rationed it to half a gallon a day, which he thought he should, he was good for a month and a half, and if he went a month and a half without seeing anybody or getting rescue, he'd be insane anyway, or starve to death. Probably starved, he thought, and the hunger pulsed up in him again. He drank more water, 3 more cups, which seemed to help the hunger, and returned to work. There were what seemed to be tons of equipment. Owen had always been one for having tools, what he called gear. You've got to have lots of gear, he'd say. Gear makes it all go. Drawers of tools, winch handles, bins with anchors, not 1 but 2 of them, each with 50 feet of galvanized chain, and nylon rope for the anchors, called rode, not rope, and he did not know why. Nor why they called the ropes that held the sails sheets and not ropes, nor why they called the pulleys blocks. Owen had never told him, and he hadn't found a book to read on it yet. Under the left side of the forward bunk, along the edge of the water tank, there was a small but thick rod with a reel on it, and heavy line, and a canvas sack with small wrapped packets of fishing lures and hooks. There was also a strange, cone-shaped, extremely fine mesh net, a foot across at the mouth and tapering to a point, and perhaps 8 feet long. That made no sense to David at all, unless it was to hang things over the side to wash them or something. Under the left couch bunk, he found a deflated rubber dinghy and a plastic paddle, but there was no other survival gear, no flares or signaling devices on the boat. Apparently, Owen had never figured on being lost or having trouble at sea. He liked to sail mostly in coastal waters, up and down the coast to visit the small California towns, and probably just hadn't thought of being out very far. There was 1 drawer full of small towels and wash rags, another of silverware and knives, the one that had come loose and dumped everything on the floor during the storm, and every single thing was dripping. Water had gotten into all the drawers, in the storage compartments, under all the cushions, into all the sailbags. Everything was soaked. As he removed and cleaned and checked the gear, he took the wetter things topside to dry in the sun, which was now beating down on the still boat like a broiler element. Soon the Frog was covered with cloth cushions, drying sails, ropes, rags, and towels tied into all the lines that supported the mast, the shrouds and stays, and along the handrails. David almost laughed out loud looking at her. Owen would have hated it, always liked the boat to be tight and ship-shape. David had her looking like a picture he'd seen of a Chinese junk in the harbor at Hong Kong, with several families living on the boat, drying their laundry in the rigging. Rag boat, he said to himself, standing in the cockpit under a cushion draped over the boom and dripping water. Just an old rag boat. The heat dried the thinner things rapidly, however, and within an hour the sails, towels, and 2 blankets were dry and folded and stored back in the boat in dry bags or drawers. The cushions, of 4-inch thick foam rubber, took longer. In the meantime, he opened all the cabins and aired them out. The inside of the Frog was baking hot. He opened the front hatch wide, but it didn't help because there was still no air movement. The day went rapidly as he worked. By late afternoon, all the trash was cleaned up and in a plastic bag he'd found. He'd started to throw it over the side, but stopped for 2 reasons. He thought it might attract sharks, and he didn't want to do anything that attracts sharks, and he thought he might be able to use it. Nothing was trash now, he thought. When he had nothing, everything was valuable, and so he kept the sack of trash. Just as evening came down, he found a package wrapped tightly in a garbage sack, tied tightly so the water hadn't seeped inside. It felt heavy, book-like through the plastic. The inside of the cabin was getting dark, so he took the passage topside to open it, but stopped with his head out of the hatch opening. The sunset, he thought, simply that thought, the sunset. The sun seemed to be stopped just below the horizon, cutting gold bars through the water and slashing beams of light up into the sky over his head. For seconds, a full minute, he let the beauty of the sunset flood him, his brain blank, just pulling it in. Then he sighed. No hunger then, no thirst, and for the time that the beauty was in him, no fear. Only the rolling sea and the bars of rich, cool light, and the boat sliding up and down easily, as she was meant to, on the gentle swells. But in moments, the feeling was gone, and all of the other facts were back. He was truly alone, sitting on a small boat far out in the Pacific Ocean. Suddenly he remembered the plastic-wrapped package he was holding. He placed it on the cabin roof next to him. Standing on the top step and using the cabin top as a table, he carefully untied the wire twist tie at the top and opened the bag. Inside was a cloth-covered book, about 10 by 14 inches and just about an inch thick. He turned it to catch the light of the sunset, and across the top of the cover, written in black marker, were the words, "The Voyage of the Frog." And beneath the title in smaller letters, being the complete log of the good boat Frog. Owen had kept a log. All this time he had kept a log, and David had not known of it. It was getting dark now, but David opened the cover and held the first page up to the fading light. It was dated almost a year and a half before, written clearly in Owen's small, precise handwriting, and it told of sailing for a day alone over the deep trench that ran between the mainland of California and the island of Santa Rosa. There had been whales feeding on plankton, and he had tried pulling his plankton cone net, but with only partial success. Not enough to try a plankton burger, but enough for a taste. Plankton. That was the cone net under the forward bunk with the fishing line. It was a plankton net. David knew about plankton from biology. They were also called krill, millions of tiny, some almost microscopic, shrimp-like animals that filled the oceans of the world. He had seen pictures of them, taken through magnifying lenses. They looked like watery bugs. Many creatures fed on them, including blue whales, the largest of all animals, with mouths like huge strainers filled with a mesh called baleen. The whales would take in massive gulps of seawater and krill, strain out the water, and swallow the krill. But he hadn't thought people could eat them. Plankton were so small, you couldn't clean them in any way, would just have to eat the whole thing, tiny little legs and shells and all. He'd have to think about that one for a while. He was hungry, but he wasn't up for eating bugs yet. There were 7 cans of food. It would be hard to get his mind past the little legs and shells and feelers and actually swallow a mouthful of krill. Of course, there was the hunger, and his stomach was definitely moving toward his backbone. But still, bugs, he thought, actually eating bugs. Then there was the rod and reel. He could eat fish. The ocean was full of fish. All he had to do was catch a fish and cook it and eat it. He tried to read more, but the light was almost all gone now. A soft darkness was coming over the sea and the boat and his thoughts. He had found 3 small, fat candles and a flashlight with dead batteries. There were some matches in a Ziploc plastic bag, and he lit one of the candles and put it on a small saucer on the table and sat on the couch, bumping down on the hard plywood because the cushions were still wet up topside, to look more at the log. There were not entries for every day, only those days Owen had been on the boat. Most, virtually all, of the entries were just notations about sailing for the day, the direction of the wind, how long he had been out, what the day had been like. Sailed 4 hours and straight between mainland and island, it said. Wind northwest at 20 knots. Beautiful sun. Caught north wind and sailed wing and wing for 3 hours. Clean run with no roll. Clearly, the entries were a personal record and not meant to be read by other people. David came upon a page that read, "Brought Susan aboard for sail out to islands." The entry went on in some detail about the 2 days in Fry's Cove, diving for abalone and lobster, swimming. David felt strange reading it, as if he were prying somehow, but yet he couldn't stop reading it either. Finally, he closed the log abruptly and blew out the candle. In the darkness, he couldn't read it and was safe from his own curiosity. With the lights out and the log closed, he realized how tired he was and still sore from the beating he'd taken. The quiet lapping of the water against the hull and the woof thump of the halyards bumping against the mast as the boat rocked made his eyelids weigh a ton, and he leaned over on the plywood bench and fell into a deep sleep. The oil tanker came about midnight.